You're watching Top 10 Direct, and today we are counting down our picks for the top 10 things your ancestors did better than you. Number 10, saving the planet. While the most common plastic today was actually invented in 1998, it didn't go into general production until the 1930s. It was then that ICI opened the world's first manufacturing plant. On the same day, Adolf Hitler invaded Poland, September 1st, 1939. Nevertheless, it wasn't until the 1960s that the production of plastic on a mammoth scale became truly viable. Since then, well, you know what happens since then, because you're living in it. Products like straws, bags, and the many products we use in our daily lives have led to this pollution nightmare. And the stuff that we don't use, we just toss in the trash and it ends up in the dump. Number 9, living within their means. In 1944, Bretton Woods system was created, in which instead of countries redeeming their money for gold, they would redeem for US dollars. This made the US dollar the new form of gold in a sense. The US dollar was pegged to the value of gold, and that still meant to keep the system stable while allowing new things like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to have a little bit more flexibility in the creation of money. And then in 1971, this all fell apart. President Nixon ended the connection between gold and the US dollar, and the printing presses began to roll full steam ahead. From that moment on, we began living off the earnings of the future. The reason our lives today don't look like the pages out of a book of the Great Depression is that we all have been made artificially rich. The terrifying thing is that this is all going to come down. We just don't know when. Number 8, improving the mind. Books, simple as that. We all have access to them, but instead of reading, we stare at glowing pieces of glass all day. It is all well and good to fill your phone with apps like Google Books and Kindle, but it's hard to resist the pull of a thumbs up on a post for your latest cafe lunch or clothing purchase. There are many ways that we can mimic our ancestors in terms of improving our minds. The first is to abolish the use of electronic devices for at least a small part of the day. Set aside an hour a day to read a book. When you become engrossed in a good book, your mind opens up in many different ways. Your rational and emotional minds need to be tended, but more importantly perhaps is your imagination. It is from the imagination that so many great things of man have come. And movies and social media posts prevent the use of imagination, replacing instead with the ideas from another person's mind. You might be in possession of the brain that will invent the next great concept in human development, but you're too busy scrolling through pics of incredibly hilarious sports photos to notice. 7. Eating. I might sound like a broken record at this stage, but in brief, the US government made everyone fat by advocating a ridiculous pro-vegetarian, anti-fat diet in the 1960s and 70s. Now that is out of the way, the history of eating. Breakfast didn't even exist as anything more than a drink and a snack until the 19th century. And lunch was the main meal of the day for most. This is all in reference to the Europe culture, of course. Then the Seventh-day Adventists got us eating cereal every day. The government got us eating chemical margarines instead of butter and fat. And the media sold us on Coke and other delights. This is not to say that there weren't fat people before this occurred, but frankly, these days obesity seems to be less the thing to avoid and more the goal. 6. Exercise. So you need to lose a few pounds or improve your health. What do? You sign up for a decade-long membership at a fancy gym and then attend only one session. We have somehow been programmed with the awful notion that exercise is best done indoors and intensely for a short period of time. But are thinner and probably longer lived if we exclude child mortality from age death statistics. Ancestors knew better. Our predecessors didn't, as a general rule, take their exercise in a rigid manner. They simply walked everywhere, then went and did the hard jobs themselves. Doing the laundry took all day, and the housewives, unless they could afford a maid, would call up on her friends to assist. Number 5. Having manners. Long gone are the days of writing thank you notes for gifts. In some cases, people don't even bother with thank you notes for wedding gifts, which has, for most people, the last remnant in society of formal thank yous. Once upon a time, a thank you note was issued for a million different reasons. If someone gave you a gift, you wrote a note. If someone had you to dinner, you wrote a note. It was the height of bad manners to not make the effort to thank a person for the effort they had gone for your pleasure. Makes a lot of sense, really. But alas, out comes those shiny bits of glass again. And the most you can expect from these days is a thanks on Instagram or Snapchat. Number 4, buildings. New construction regulations coupled with building materials such as styrofoam, plastics and various materials have meant that we can build houses much faster and more unconventionally than we have in the past. But the end result is sometimes buildings which can simply not stand up to the age. The weather or natural disasters in the same way as an old construction built with stone and timber. One good example of this was Christchurch earthquake in 2011. In that old city, 60% of the deaths were the result of the collapse of modern CTV buildings. And while many of the old buildings were later condemned, they stood up to the quake better than those with strict earthquake guidelines, but new building codes. Next time there is a big one, I sure as heck hope I'm in an old Victorian building. They revoked their own remit to educate. If there is no objective truth, there is no reason to teach. You can now watch a video after video on YouTube of young university students who don't even know who Adolf Hitler was. Feelings surpass facts, and the entire history of Western civilization is rendered down to and described as white male patriarchy in a tone that is completely hateful. Number 2, creating art. There will be, in time, a list about modern art and its decline. Some would obviously not agree that it is indeed a decline. But until then, we shall content ourselves with the brief declaration. Modern art don't know how to art. What passes as fine art these days is astonishingly bad. Bottles of human urine with sacred objects in them. Excrement smeared over canvases. And the unmade bed are lauded as fine things. All these items on the list, art is single-handedly the most extreme example of the differences between our ancestors and us. Pretty much all art up to the 1990s is beautiful, and some beyond into the early stages of the 2000th century. But at some point we got sidetracked and art ceased to be about beauty and become about an expression of novelty or shock. Number 1, having fun. If future generations looked at an Apple advertisement, they would believe that we lived in one of the most fun-filled times. The ads are full of laughing groups of diverse friends exploring all manners of fun hobbies. But the whole thing is contrived. The reality of our time is that we are dutifully going to work, earn the money we need to take the occasional holiday, and spend a lot of time online getting upset at other people's opinions and feelings. And then we lap up mainstream movies and interpretations of the likes of Charlie Dickens' books, filled with door and ugly women, beating children or crippled men with misery in every line drawn across their face. Perhaps this allows us to be thankful we aren't them. Perhaps it lulls us with a false sense of comfort against this miserable part of our own lives.